What's up everyone, Nukin here and welcome back to the channel. We're going to be doing a roster review today from one of my patrons here, Bnutty. And so roster reviews are basically a series that I do for my patrons. I'm going to answer questions that Bnutty has specifically geared towards his roster. Now I also try to make these very general as well for everyone, so hopefully everyone else out there watching can also get some value from this too. So some of the topics that we're going to talk about today are how to mod your Resistance Heroic Sith Raid team for Phase 1 of the raid, what to Zeta next, we have a lot of potential possibilities, and then also we're going to take a look at some Sith Raid teams that we can build out of this roster. And I almost forgot, I did want to do a really quick shout out to Bnutty, and this might actually end up embarrassing him, but Bnutty is a really cool dude. He was actually in my guild and volunteered himself to go down to a guild that was not Heroic Sith Raid ready, and he even did it like 1 or 2 weeks in advance to help them go and beat the Heroic Sith Raid. So he actually lost trash shards doing this, and so I think that's really nice of him. It's a really cool gesture. That is a team player right there. So shout out to Bnutty for being awesome. All right, so now let's kick off this roster review. So let's start off this review with how to mod your Resistance team for the Heroic Sith Raid. So this was one of your questions that you wanted to know, and this is one variant of many. I'm not sure exactly which variant you're running, but I noticed you do have a 7-star Visas, so she's exceptional on this team, and you can run 5 Resistance characters if you would like. It's easier to run a support healer character because it's more consistent. I think really the core of this Phase 1 team is both of the Rays, so Ray Scavenger and Jedi Training Ray and BB-8, and then the last 2 slots are kind of up in the air depending on your playstyle and you know, your time constraints, because it's going to be a lot harder if you run 5 Resistance characters versus running just 4 and maybe a support character like Zeta Barris or Visas. For your attackers like Jedi Training Ray, you want to run crit damage sets. For your droids, if you're going to run R2-D2 and BB-8, you want to do speed sets, and so that's basically going to be your main differences. For the attackers like Scavenger Ray and Jedi Training Ray and Resistance Trooper, you want to have high secondary offense, you want to go for maximum crit damage, you want offense, crosses, and speed arrows. For BB-8, you want basically just a ton of speed. You can go for some offense primaries on the cross and the triangle, and for Visas, stack a bunch of offense because she has a very high damage multiplier. You could also run a crit damage set on her, just try to get her crit chance closer to 50%, and you can run a offense arrow on her as well. So now on to the next topic, which is all about Zeting the next future characters for Bnutty. So Bnutty wants to know who he should Zeta next. So here are his Zetas, and there are a lot of good ones there. And what I can see 3 different potential sort of opportunities or paths you can take Bnutty. First of all, I see some holes on your pilots. We'll talk about that in just a second. I see some optional sort of Zetas for the Sith Raid teams, like for example, maybe Oldaka and Wampa, which are on your 6-star for Wampa, so he's getting pretty close, so that's something to consider. And then I also see something that we can't actually see it because we don't have her yet, but we're on the brink of a new sort of Sith arena meta, so that's something to think about in the back of your mind as well. So let's talk about the pilots first. So here are some pilots, and I guess you could add First Order TIE Fighter pilot and Death Trooper, and I guess Thrawn is considered a fleet commander, but basically these are some good options right now to consider. We don't know exactly how Ships 2.0 is going to go down and how it's going to shake up the meta, but I would be very surprised if the Chimera still wasn't a very good ship, so Thrawn is a good option. And then depending if the meta shifts from sort of an Empire fleet to First Order, you know, maybe zenning some First Order characters like Kylo Ren Unmasked would be a good idea. So if you're going to hold off on Zeting your pilots, which I think is generally probably going to be the best idea to do so you can be safe, then you have some other options like your Heroic Sith Raid teams, your Wampa for the tank raid, and First Order for the Sith Raid and TW, and potentially Scion and Traya. So Daka is great on a Night Sister team for the Heroic Sith Raid. Wampa's Cornered Beast is basically required to use him in the tank raid with Darth Vader. That's what gives him all that offense, so that's something to consider. You're coming up on Wampa's last star pretty soon, and so for the First Order characters, you can try and pick maybe Zeting either Kylo Ren, the masked version, or the Stormtrooper to kind of boost the strength of your First Order squad. And the last thing to consider is the future of your arena team. So if you're going to be running Traya as soon as you unlock her, which should be pretty soon, you're going to need at least 3 Zetas, one on Nihilus, Darth Scion, and Darth Traya's unique. So for the last topic, we have some Sith Raid teams. So Bnutty wants to know some Sith Raid teams. So I looked over his roster, and here are some lineups that you can potentially run Bnutty, and we're not going to be overlapping on some of these characters. So, and then for everyone else watching, this is one of my main questions that I always get. And it's like, well, this guy has already Gear 12 characters already. Well, this is just me being on the dev account because it's easier to display all these teams in one place. These aren't actually Bnutty's characters. Okay, so for the very first phase, we have the Resistance Squad, which we kind of went over when we talked about how to mod your Resistance team for phase 1. And then moving on from there, we have, starting with phase 2, we have a Wampa team. So I know that you don't have a 7-star Wampa, but I am assuming that you're working towards that last star. So I wanted to include a team that you can run with the Wampa in phase 2 of the Heroic Sith Raid that didn't use Boba Fett. Now, I have a feeling that Boba Fett will probably be best used on a bounty hunter squad, but that remains to be seen quite yet, and we still don't even have boss, so we don't know. But this is actually a decent Wampa team that does quite well, and I'm not sure a lot of people actually know about it. It's a General Kenobi lead, and you're using similar characters like Thrawn and Sabine, but you're getting way more assist attacks, and that kind of sort of balances out the lack of crit damage coming from Boba Fett's leadership because you're calling Wampa to assist more often with Kenobi, and Luminara under a Kenobi lead also calls all of the team to assist. The next team is a Nukin stealth cheese team, and so basically Night Sister Zombie keeps coming back to life, so she can tank and tank all day long, and then you have stealth characters like Acolyte and Leia that benefit off being in stealth with Nukin leadership, and then Newt and even R2-D2 goes into stealth occasionally. And so since you're using Visas on your Resistance team, it opens up the opportunity to use R2-D2 elsewhere, and actually there's way more synergy with R2-D2 here than you might think. R2-D2 can immediately start off going into stealth, which immediately gets Leia going even faster because she can start off getting offense up quicker, and R2-D2 boosts Rebels because that's part of his many factions that he has, so Leia does even more damage, and so it's actually generally a pretty good team to run. So then we have a First Order squad. So with Kylo Ren on Mass, you have the Zeta, and you have some of these 7-star First Order characters. Now for the last slot, we have a Kylo Ren masked version, and we don't have a Zeta on him quite yet. But if you're going to Zeta a First Order character, put the character that you end up Zetaing. So either the Stormtrooper or the Kylo Ren masked version. And so this whole team is basically a Phase 2 team where you try to get around 500k damage or so. Maybe you can do more in phase 4. I have yet to try it myself. I just got Fox to 7-star, and I've only tried one P2 battle, did about 400k on my first try. But this squad is all about basically getting Fox or Foe to go more often, and that's with characters like the SF TIE Pilot and First Order Officer calling Fox to assist or giving Fox turn meter. We have a few more P2 teams, and then we have an Imperial Trooper team. So you have a bunch of 7-star Imperial Troopers, and they do quite well. They do about 500k to 1 million damage in P2 of the Heroic Sith Raid. Since you don't have a 7-star Wampa, you can actually consider running a Thrawn-led Imperial Trooper team until you get that 7-star Wampa, and that will do even better. But once you have a 7-star Wampa, you'll run a team like this. You don't have a very strong Stormtrooper. I think I might prefer him over the Magma Trooper, but yeah, you can run something like this for now. And then we have the Bounty Hunter squad, which is going to be interesting to see how they do in the Heroic Sith Raid. So these are your best geared bounty hunters. So we're using Zam, and eventually you'll probably end up using Bosk because he's really good on a bounty hunter squad. And since we're not using Boba Fett with Wampa, we can run a Boba Fett lead in the Heroic Sith Raid. And then as well, since I made a video on showcasing some potential viability of bounty hunters versus Darth Nihilus, which means they could probably also potentially be used in Phase 1 or Phase 4, if you're going to run them in Phase 2, you don't necessarily really need a supporting character that can heal the team or a Dengar lead, so you'll do more damage running this sort of Boba Fett lead in the Heroic Sith Raid in Phase 2 against Darth Sion. So now we're going to move on to the Phase 3 teams, and we have 2 teams here to suggest. We have the Chex Mix team, and basically you're going to be running this for sure. It does really good damage, like 2 million plus, and you can pick your 5th character. Typically you want to have an attacker, and then an attacker that can do offense up like Jedi Knight Anakin or Pal will be superior in that position. If you don't want to run an attacker, you can also run a support character like Palpatine or Qui-Gon Jinn, who can put offense up, but they're not an attacker, so you'll be doing a little bit less damage. The last P3 team is sort of a Empire Rolo squad, and it is a little bit unusual. I think you could probably try and put a extra attacker instead of Tarkin here, but basically this team is going to be a combination of trying to land some dots to squeeze some damage out there, but the main damage source is actually going to come from Rolo. So what you can do here is you can topple Traya, activate standalone on Rolo, and make sure she has a bunch of crit chance, and when you unleash her special, all of those attacks, which would normally be sort of spread out as an AoE area of effect attack, will be single target on Darth Traya, and since she has the standalone, she'll be doing like 15 to 20k crits per sort of bombardment. So that is another team that you can do to try and squeeze, I don't know, around 100 to 300k damage out of Darth Traya in Phase 3. And to really help you set it up easier is right before you're about to end your Chex Mix battle, instead of going straight to the face on Darth Traya, you can sort of help set up the lightsabers to be easily toppled with a secondary team like this right before you end your Chex Mix team battle. And then lastly, we have some Phase 4 teams. So starting it off, we have a Night Sister squad, which is probably the strongest Phase 4 team period. Now, Night Sisters are super good, and since you're using Night Sister Acolyte and Night Sister Zombie in Phase 2 with the Nukin Ray team, then you can actually use these Night Sisters. And I noticed that you don't have a geared up Initiate or Spirit, and now that Night Sister Spirit is farmable, you can actually take a second to think about who you want to gear up, Spirit or Initiate. So they both have positive things going for them. Night Sister Spirit overall does way more damage, I believe, than the Initiate, even with her Zeta, and putting a Zeta on Initiate feels dirty. Night Sister Initiate does have some supporting capabilities of giving you a crit chance up buff for the rest of the Night Sisters, but I'm not sure how valuable that is, since Darth Nihilus can kind of just steal that away, and their crit chance isn't very high to begin with, and sometimes you're running offense mods on them like Talzin, so I'm not necessarily sure how valuable Spirit versus Initiate is. I'm leaning towards Night Sister Spirit right now. And then on top of that, if you want a Zeta Oldaka, we talked about that earlier, that will make the team even better. On top of this, we have some other teams that we can run. We have the clone team here. So we also have this clone team, and the bonds of weakness interaction with a Zeta 5s, which you actually do have, is going to be different now. They patched it, and so they've been doing that with a lot of characters in the bonds of weakness interaction. And so this team is still going to be used in the same exact place, even though that interaction was changed, because you are able to get turn meter from Rex's leadership anyways. So since they do more damage here than any other part of the raid, you will still run your clones in phase 4, and that team was consisting of 4 clones and 1 very slow tank. So you can take out one of the clones and you can put in like Sunfac or Baze and hit the Unbreakable Will, and you can do, I don't know, somewhere between 500k damage, maybe 200 to 500k damage. Something to try if phase 2 first order doesn't work for you is to put your first order in phase 4, and then of course, since it's the end of the raid, you just want to throw the rest of your roster and the kitchen sink against these ancient Sith Lords. So the rest of what isn't used, kind of just throw them in here. I believe there's some teams that I missed that you can probably use in phase 2. Like for example, you could use Phoenix and Jedi and stuff like that in phase 2 as well, but I didn't want to basically take up the entire video putting kitchen sink P2 teams. So if you have any extra questions about extra sort of kitchen sink related teams, shoot me a message after this. And that basically concludes all the Sith raid team suggestions that I have for you, Bnutty. And that concludes the roster review. So thanks everyone for watching. I hope this was helpful for you guys. I try to make it general for everyone else watching and not just for the patron who I'm reviewing. Thanks Bnutty for being awesome, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Cheers.